don't touch each other, please. They go right down deep, and they have collided. So both the BWT cars collide.
So internecine squabble between the two Williams. Looking for that Rosberg tap the back of Webber. That is absolutely the last thing any Formula One team wants to see.
That's a Lacey and Heidfeld. I don't know what's happened, but it's the big poor Alain Prost, as if he hadn't got enough pressure on him.
Oh, we've lost a wheel. It's a racing engineering car that's ripped his left wheel off. Furious at his teammate. That will be a very fun team briefing.
Hello there. Welcome to episodes 7. I was going to say we've done so many episodes of the GP Rejects podcast, but we've literally only done 7, and I've really lost count. I think it's episode 7 of Teammate Collision. I'm Jeremy Scott. I am your host, along with my co-host, Lennart.
It's, as usual, a pleasure to be here, and I am looking forward to entertaining you all with our opinions on Formula One and the world of motorsport in general.
We are going to jump straight into this podcast because all our previous podcasts have been like 2.5 hours long. So let's keep this one nice and turbo fast. So we're going to chat today about the wonderful triple header, rounds 25 to 27 of our 62 race calendar, before our special segment of this week, which is the Lucky Bastards.
So yeah, the family friendliness has been turned down. We're going edgy for the ratings.
So the Lucky Bastards are the people who are not rejects, but so close to being so. We're looking at the people who, I think by our official rule qualification, someone who would be a reject in Formula One, if not for one result. But first, shall we do a quick summary of the last couple of races, Lennart?
We sure shall, and the summary is Max Verstappen wins.
Wow, that's the 2022 Formula One season. Thank you for joining us for this Teammate Collision podcast. I have a sinking feeling that Max Verstappen might win this season.
Yeah, and given as he's pretty much on a roll now, the question seems not if, but only when. And it's really amazing, given as at the start of the season, if anything, the question of not if, but when seemed to be about Leclerc's championship, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, what timing. We did our first podcast of this year after Australia, when I think Leclerc had all but 7 or so of the possible maximum points. And now we're in a situation whereby Verstappen is like almost 5 wins ahead of him. And yeah, we're looking at this unbridled Verstappen dominance, which I think people, I mean, even we with our terribly out of date now opinions back in March, even we assumed that Verstappen would win races and compete this year. But the level to which the tables have turned, we haven't really spoken a huge amount about modern Formula One, like present day stuff, since I think Miami. So to look at how the standings look now compared to how they were at Miami is absurd. We're looking at like 1 or 2 or maybe maximum 3 podiums for Charles Leclerc in the last 10 or so races. And this is someone who had front row lockouts with Ferrari and was set to win this championship by a long shot.
Well, I recall back then saying that Red Bull needed to get their reliability votes in order, and they sure have done that. Unlike Ferrari, who have in turn taken on the role of exploding and imploding, both with their cars and their strategies. So, yes, exactly. It is a very important reminder to not judge a book. To not judge a season by the very first races. Though, if you allow me the very quick statistical aside, if, or more likely saying when, Max wins the championship, he will be only the second driver in this millennium to win the World Championship despite not scoring any points in the season opener.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I was thinking it was 2003 Schumacher, but apparently he finished 4th in that race. So I would guess it must be 2014 when Hamilton retired at the beginning of the season in the first race.
That is correct.
We totally didn't edit that in. But
Absolutely not. And we certainly did not need any time to look this up. We obviously knew this off the top of our
just like
head.
Sky Sports, we have all of our stats verified on a piece of paper in front of us. But
Indeed.
yeah, speaking of Lewis Hamilton,
We're going to fire in the intern for that.
speaking of Lewis Hamilton and people retiring, I mean, no one's ever had such a bad car as he had this season. But Mercedes, we predicted would win a race this year, and they've been pretty close. Mostly due to their invincibility of the car and their strategies and their team. Like, I think if there's anything we can say this year, obviously, like, George Russell is the real deal, and I'm sure in a faster car he will possibly dominate a future championship or two. But really, this season just really drives home why Mercedes won in 2017 and 2018 and why Ferrari didn't. Because you have Mercedes they're third in the championship, and they have the third best car. Like, they're exactly where they should be, but they're a league ahead of Alpine, and they're significantly behind Ferrari. And the fact is that every race, they do perfect pit stops. They have an invincible car which never breaks down. As long as their drivers keep the car on the track, they basically have no problems. And as a result, they are genuinely challenging for second in the championship.
Yeah, especially even when they have bad races or they make mistakes or, well, whatever at the very least Hamilton would perceive as mistakes, talking about Zandvoort's strategy here, they're still doing it with a sense of logic that doesn't seem like it's out there, like what Ferrari are sometimes thinking in the terms of whom to give tires to, whom not to. In the end, they are just an elite operation. It shows even with their weaker car, and yeah, that's why they won 2017 and 2018 and Ferrari didn't, as you said. So we are going to cut that repetition.
No, it's like, I sure do love people flattering my ego, Lennart, so I'll keep that in.
I know that, and I can very much relate to that, but
yeah. Looking
the quest for shorter podcasts, that might not be too helpful.
Thinking about further down the order, I mean, McLaren it seems like they're slipping away on the fight with Alpine. And I think that is as much to do with, well, let's talk about Alpine. I think that's much more interesting than McLaren, because McLaren seem to have a decent chassis now that they're now the shenanigans of hiring every driver on the planet seem to be dying down. We now have a situation whereby Alonso, who is, I remind you, at the time of speaking, 41 years old, is genuinely performing at least at the level of Esteban Ocon most races. And as a result, Alpine are, with a decent, reliable car, are chasing fourth in the championship here. And I think it's... Yeah. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Lennart, actually, on the situation with Alonso, Ocon, Alpine, and perhaps what do you think about that whole situation?
Well, obviously the first instinct is to think that Alonso bet on the wrong horse with his move to Aston Martin, because Alpine are getting their best effort out there. They are pretty much doing rather well in the recent races. They have developed the car in the right direction, are obviously not on Mercedes' level and therefore not going to challenge for podiums on merit, but the reality is, if you look at the races, you will always pretty much find one or two Alpines doing something, either outright being best of the rest or challenging for it, and yeah, that's a pretty stable result from a team that sometimes, I must admit, I have the feeling is content to simply just exist, to simply be on the grid for the sake of being on the grid, especially now in the budget cap era, where pretty much you don't need all that much spending to keep a works team going as compared to the old eras, or more precisely the late 2000s. And so, yeah, they are doing a great job. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do on the driver front now that that the Piastri debacle has been solved, not in their favor, to put it that way. And they huge test, coming up, their supposed big shootout for the second seed. Who will win that one? And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see if the right driver can convince at the test and where they will go from here. So yeah, I'm curious to see whether Alpine still has the it's such a cliche phrase, but the winning DNA of Enstone, the Renault of the mid-2000s, even the Lotus years where they were a top team, or at least always approximating it. And so it's going to be I'm very curious to see both how they finish out the season, whether they can keep this positive momentum going, and whether it will mean something for the upcoming years. If we're talking about Alonso, one of the reasons I'm certain he was interested in Aston Martin is that Stroll is, without a shadow of a doubt, a very ambitious team owner, even if that ambition may not actually result in positive results, but he is ambitious. That is, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so, yeah, I'm curious to see where they will be going with this.
Yeah, I think ambition from Stroll also translates into Alonso's eyes as a big pile of money. I think Stroll is very ambitious to have Alonso driving for him. So, I mean, okay, let's imagine you are the team principal of Alpine, Lennart. You have two options for your second seat: Antonio Giovinazzi or Nico Hülkenberg. Who'd you pick?
Bullet. Honestly, I would go with Hülkenberg. The thing is, both are stagnation. Let's be blunt about this. Both don't really take your team anywhere. No, not. They don't get you closer to the top with either excellent driving skill or excellent potential. But I would go with Hülkenberg simply because A, he's just the better driver outright, and B, the thing with Giovinazzi is...
Well, this was more of a joke question. I think it's Haas who are actually the ones considering,
they are.
I think, both.
So I think Giovinazzi was invited to that monster test, if it is happening.
I think everyone and their mothers were invited to that test for Alpine. I think if Alpine could find anyone,
everyone not signed to McLaren.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain they have like a sign-up sheet on their website. If you just put in your email address, they'll send you the location. Yeah, I mean, okay. I was going to. This is a very roundabout way of sort of replying to what you said at the beginning, which is that Alonso may have bet on the wrong horse for Alpine. But I think, honestly, it's a strange thing to say that Alpine probably bet on the wrong horse of Ocon. I think it was kind of bizarre when they picked him sort of for a 3-year contract at Alpine, being their lead driver. I mean, like, he got that win last year and you can't take that away from him, but that was extraordinary circumstances. And even at his best this year, where I think most people would agree Ocon's been pretty solid, he's still like at the pace of a 41-year-old. Admittedly, Alonso is a world champion, and I don't think anyone is disparaging Alonso's ability even at his advanced age, but he is also 41 years old, and I think Ocon, if I'm not mistaken, is about 15 years younger than him. So for them to be operating at the same level when Ocon has a 3-year deal as leader of the Alpine team is a bit shaky, especially as you were saying about forward thrust. It's like, okay, Ocon is your team leader, who's your second guy? Because it seems to me that there's no forward thrust with that team leader. You've got to get someone in the second seat who's
capable of providing a spark. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing is, I understand why they did it. I don't think it's just that win last year. It's also, well, to be blunt, the fact that he's French. And maybe they were just weren't sure they were going to be able to get Gasly eventually. Of course, now he would have been, or he is kinda-ish. At the time of, to clarify for the listener, at the time of the recording, we didn't have a decision on whether Hertha would be given a super license or not. And obviously without that, Gasly ain't going nowhere. And of course, in hindsight, they couldn't have known that Toro Rosso AlphaTauri would be interested in signing Colton Herta. So I guess they just wanted to long-term secure the French driver because they, if I recall correctly, they do have a couple of 1 or 2 French drivers in their Alpine Academy, but honestly, the fact that I don't recall their names says a lot, even if I tend to be disparaging of junior series. I generally tend to remember the names of them in them that have the potential to matter down the road.
Yeah, it's like, no, I get it 100%. And it's also a factor of like most recent Formula One. It's like, who are the people being considered for the Alpine seat and the Haas seat? Well, there's Mick Schumacher, Antonio Giovinazzi, Nico Hülkenberg. It's like, what do all these people have in common? It's like they've all already driven in Formula One for many years and are definitely probably not going up. I mean, people talk about Mick Schumacher having his season and a half into a season and then he suddenly jumps up in performance. Well, he had a great race in Austria and he had a great race in Silverstone. And what has he done since? I admittedly, we're talking about Haas here, and as you predicted, was correct. Haas fell back by the wayside and haven't really done anything in the last couple of races. Don't look to be doing anything, but yeah, I think it's also a problem of this sort of stagnation in the current era of Formula One. It's not a new thing, but yeah, just hiring the same old drivers over and over and over again until they hit their mid-40s. And as a result, Alpine's best shot is Esteban Ocon, which is like decent, but for a lead driver at the 4th best team on the grid, it's weird.
Yeah, I mean, they did have one young name on that, or even 2 names. I think they even called in Hertha, and I think they also are looking at Doohan from Formula 2, the Australian. Can't have one Australian tying the other one.
But we already have one rookie coming to the grid next year, so we can't have a second one there. It's not possible to have 2 rookies on the grid at the same time.
Yeah, that would be audacious. Too bold, too horrible for franchise value. It would destroy all the value.
Okay, let's wrap this up sooner rather than later. What have we not talked about? Alfa Romeo, good start to the season, but kind of fallen by the wayside. Guan Yu Zhou had a point back in Monza, but he's been okay. Kind of dependable, not on Bottas's level, but then again, Bottas himself has kind of had he, like Kevin Magnussen, had a great start to the season, but both of them seem to have settled into mediocrity in the most recent races.
Yeah, it seems like, although this is bluntly speculation, it seems like Ferrari themselves aren't quite keeping up with engine development, because it is the Ferrari power teams that are slowly falling to the back of the grid. Of course, Haas is just Haas, so I ain't never going to blame Ferrari for anything happening at Haas, because they can mess up a season well without any help. But yeah, Alfa Romeo just lost performance. Then again, they got their point at Monza, so the engine can't be that big a problem. Obviously not helping is that the Alfa Romeo deal with Sauber is coming to an end, as Audi will be joining Formula One soon, taking over a healthy part of the team. So for them, probably the rest of this year and the next really 2 years may just be gap filler, but we'll find out one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I may have mentioned this in the previous podcast, but I do feel sorry for Bottas, and that he spent his whole career at Mercedes his whole career at Williams and Mercedes trying to get a 2+, 3+ year contract, and now he's finally got one, and now his team is basically, the rug is being pulled out from under him. So
life is cruel sometimes.
Yeah, well, 2-year contract's better than one, I guess.
And any contract is better than no contract. Just ask all the drivers that aren't in F1 right now.
That's true. That is very true. And speaking of not being in F1, did you see the race at Monza? And did you see how Nick de Vries did against his current illustrious teammate Nicholas Latifi?
Yeah, and interestingly, though, it felt like a weekend of 2 halves. Because in qualifying, he really wasn't anywhere near ahead of Latifi. I mean, he made Q2 and Latifi didn't, but the difference between them was, what was it again?
It was a very close timing, I remember, yeah.
0.05 of a second? Anyway, but then on Sunday, obviously, he was the man and Latifi very much wasn't, so... and earned himself IIDOTR. Why did I try to say that? on our forums, and rightfully so. So yeah, he's obviously now has inserted his name into every conversation about every open seat for the rest of the season.
Yeah, good on him, honestly. I think it's just... I'm going to make a funny prediction here. So,
Let's hear it.
Antonio Giovinazzi debuted in 2017, not 2019, because he did 2 races when Pascal Wehrlein had shunted his car in the testing, I think, pre-season testing. I can't remember the exact details, but Giovinazzi's first race was great. People were singing his praises. My goodness, how great is Giovinazzi? I can't wait for him to see him in a full-time driver in Formula One. The following race, if I'm not mistaken, was at China. And at that race, he crashed in qualifying at the final corner. And then I think he crashed in the race at the exact same corner. And it was highly embarrassing. And it dropped all of his stock immediately. Now, I have heard through the news that Alex Albon is not very well at all. His appendicitis, which left him out the race, may be quite serious, or at least surgical complications mean that he may have to be out for quite some time. Now, my concern is, if Albon does miss, let's say, a race, or even 2, or even the rest of the season, that Nick de Vries is ironically going to lose his stock by being present more. Because I think it seems like Monza may have been a very good track for Williams. And if that's the case, and de Vries spends the rest of the season in 19th place, people may get that false impression that actually, oh, maybe he's not all that good. Maybe Monza was a fluke. So that's just a prediction of mine, that it would have been better for de Vries had he just dropped the mic and gone home. But the situation comes now that he may be back in Singapore, Japan, etc. Yeah, maybe it might be a curse rather than a blessing. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, Singapore is going to be probably rather challenging for Williams. I don't think they were very good at Monaco earlier this year, but I can't quite remember the details. So if I'm wrong on that, correct me or cut it. Yeah, and therefore I think your prediction could end up being very well true. Of course, it remains to be seen what happens with Albon. We all know racing drivers can be very stubborn people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it. And so, obviously, if the doctors give Albon any sort of go, he will take it and run with it. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that, or whether de Vries gets another shot this year and how he does. Of course, given his his next outing would be a street track, and he's coming from Formula E, home of the eternal street track, so
That's true. Maybe it'll be his first podium. Oh. Let's see.
So perhaps he should do Singapore and then hope Albon is fit again.
Okay, shall we move on to segment number 2? We're talking today about Lucky Basterds. I might comedically bleep out the first one, but I'm not going to do it for the whole, otherwise I'll be editing this for hours. But a Lucky Bastard. I can do
it myself. Lucky beep.
God, no. Please, no. We're talking about Lucky Basterds. Now, a Lucky Bastard, to be one, you have to not be a reject, but you have to be damn close to being one. So close, in fact, that if you removed your best result, you would be a reject. A great example of this would be someone like Pastor Maldonado, who in the old money of points had 12 points, if we're counting 10, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. Because outside of that incredible win at Catalonia, he only ever had one other top 6 result, and that was a 5th place. So if his car had broken down on the last lap of Spain, he would be a reject, and that is quite an astonishing thing to think about. And that's the category of driver we're talking about today. Lucky Bastards.
Yeah, as Jeremy so aptly said, it's about the drivers that stumbled into a top 4 finish by accident, or, as will come to be relevant down the road, stumbled into multiple top 6 finishes, or 5th place and a 6th place, and any other combinations that remove you from reject status by, well, sheer accident or by circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple occasions when this happened. I mean, the most famous pair of Lucky Bastards would be Tiago Monteiro and Narain Karthikeyan, who both finished 3rd and 4th in the US Grand Prix of 2005. Like, that was obviously an exceptional circumstance, but still counts. They're not rejects. But Lennart and I sort of had a discussion about what kinds of lucky bastards we wanted to have and what the ones we wanted to talk about today. So we each picked one. Lennart picked one who would be more in the era of had lots of little finishes, which sort of built up their non-reject status. And I went the opposite route, where I picked someone who had one result which completely took them out of reject status. But if you removed that, it was a complete anomaly in their career. So yeah, maybe we can jump straight into it. Who did you pick today, Lennart?
All right, I picked Ricardo Zonta as a prime example of the category of not a reject because they happen to have a good enough car. And that car is the BAR 2000 car, the BAR 002, which obviously in the hands of Jacques Villeneuve managed to score quite a number of points finishes. And despite simply not being not only not on Villeneuve's level, but also below the level of what I would personally consider an average driver in Formula One, or at least very least a non-reject. The reality is the car was good enough, so he was there 3 times to get his 3 sixth places, and those were the only things saving him from reject. In the end, to me personally, that is a very interesting kind of lucky bastard, because like a fluke result is something in a way you can simply, as evident by the term lucky bastard, you can simply stumble across that, whereas the career luck to have this 1 year in a good enough car to remove yourself from reject status, even though you probably kind of deserved it, is in a way much more fascinating. So
it's achieving it by complete default, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the races where Zonta scored his 3 points finishes, they had, I would say, for the time, mostly average reliability. I think the one where the most cars retired was actually that season, this 2000 season opener in Australia. But outside of that, he pretty much made it to the finish in the middle of the pack, and that occasionally meant a 6th place, sometimes it meant a 8th place, sometimes it meant a 9th, and again, 3 times it meant a 6th place.
So absolutely average, basically. The most barely qualifying for not being a reject.
Indeed, is the white noise of unrejectification.
Is there one race of those 3 races where he scored 6, which you would imagine, for example, you said that this is something where he kind of got there by default, but was there one race where he barely did it? Like, if his car had broken down or something like that? Or was it so bland that he just sailed into all 3 of those points finishes?
Well, there's obviously the 2000 Italian Grand Prix where he started 17th and ended up in 6th. So obviously that had a lot of things going his way. The most interesting thing about that Italian Grand Prix is, outside of his low starting position, is that one of the cars that retired to make his way to 6th was his very own teammate. So if reliability as a team overall had been better, then he wouldn't have had that 6th place, because obviously Villeneuve would have gotten it, because he started well up the order. In fact, he started 13 places ahead. So yeah,
that sounds like absolute default.
Where you can put the lucky.
I mean, that does sound like he would just happen to be in a car which could suit him. But I completely forgot as well. I mean, it would have been a good segue to mention the fact that obviously Ricardo Zonta was actually at the 2005 US Grand Prix. So who knows? Maybe his chance was stolen from him with that tire debacle. Maybe that race was going to be Ricardo Zonta's time to shine. But I will somewhat... I'm not going to disagree, because obviously I can't disagree with your analysis, but there is one race which is tragic in Ricardo Zonta's career, and that is the 2004 Belgian Grand Prix, where he was in 4th before his car blew up, I think, in 3 laps to go. And it was not only was it 3 laps to go, but it was behind a safety car, meaning that he wasn't even going to be challenged for 4th when I think his engine blew up. And funnily enough, that is probably the only thing, one of the few things at least I remember about the 2004 season, because I've always been a fan of rejects. And so when I saw Zonta blow up from 4th, it broke my heart. So in another universe, Zonta has a 4th place and 6 points overall, and that would obviously completely qualify him outside of Rejectum. But maybe there's moments in his career there where actually he was unjustly cast aside by you. Maybe that 1999 BAR could have taken him to a great points position if it wasn't for that terrible reliability they had.
Yeah, I mean, you have raised a good point. I mean, obviously, there is a juxtaposition here between the, in a way, lucky way he stumbled into not being a reject, all while having a much clearer run into it, taken away by circumstance. So, in a way, he's the unluckiest lucky bastard.
Okay. Was there any? Did you want to? Is that what it will say on his lucky bastard profile on our website? The unluckiest lucky bastard. It's a good one. I like it. Okay. Do you have any final closing words on Ricardo Zonta? What else has he done outside of Formula One? Do you know?
Yeah. The interesting thing with Zonta is that he had the ideal start in a way to a rookie career. He won International Formula 3000, didn't get immediately a Formula One cockpit, so he then just ran sports cars for a year, won the World Championship in that with a Mercedes, alongside Klaus Ludwig, I think it was. Then had his pickings. In fact, he had, besides BAR, he also had offers from Sauber and Jordan. The interesting part, of course, is the Jordan offer, because we all know what happened with the 1999 Jordan. Obviously, it is unclear whether he would have replaced Franzen or Hill, but...
God, imagine if he'd replaced Franzen.
Oh, jeez. Oh, for the love of the racing gods. That would be cruel.
Ricardo Zonta, almost a 2-time winner in Formula One.
Yeah, but again, I think the more interesting fact about him is really what it represents. That, again, sometimes this thing between being a reject and not being a reject is simple circumstance. Sometimes it's really just a matter of time. Sometimes it's just a matter of being picked when others aren't. And when you look, that's why I was the one who wrote the about part on our website, just to explanation for the listener. So when I wrote that being a reject does not say anything about your skill as a driver or lack thereof inherently, that is what I'm thinking of. The fact that someone like Ricardo Zonta, or someone like who wasn't my alternative option for this, Felipe Nasr, that sometimes whether you are a reject really just only and exclusively depends on the kinds of opportunities you have.
Yeah. And
how those opportunities then go, as the unluckier part of Zonta's career point out. And when you think of undoubtedly good drivers that are rejects, as you mentioned earlier, Pascal Wehrlein, Stoffel van Dorn, Jean-Eric Verne, Jaime Alguersuari. No, don't cut him. He wasn't. Was he really? I don't think he was really that good. Cut him.
Sakon Yamamoto. Frank Montagny.
No, but seriously. Yeah, again, it's just the circumstance of it all that makes these kinds of lucky bastards really fascinating to me, because they put quote-unquote real rejects into context, as a helpful reminder that, again, it's not a statement about your quality as a driver being a reject. It's merely a statement about your career.
Yeah, like we complain a lot. Even okay, that could just put a full stop at the end of that sentence. But I'll continue. We complain a lot about junior series. There are so many problems with the junior series, which you have written about in your Gravel Traps quite often. And one of those problems is, the best drivers aren't making it to the top, etc., etc. And you have a situation whereby Ricardo Zonta, when you say, as you said, like, oh, he's a GT World Champion, oh, he's the Formula 3000 World Champion, and he didn't get to Formula 1 immediately, and when he did, he got dumped in the 1999 BAR, and it's like, okay, well, in some ways when it comes to the junior talent, if we're just judging by results alone, surely he deserves a place in Formula 1. But when he got to Formula 1, he wasn't necessarily all that great. And some things never change, I guess, is my roundabout point, because I feel like we still have this conversation with many new drivers. Like junior careers don't really translate ever consistently into Formula 1 performance or ability or anything like that. And
like the drivers you mentioned earlier, or one of the drivers you mentioned earlier, Nico Hülkenberg, was also a prime example of winning everything there basically is to win before Formula 1. And first year got destroyed by Rubens Barrichello, and from then on it was clear, okay, this kid ain't gonna be great in Formula 1.
Yeah, I mean, Paul di Resta won the greatest championship in the entire universe, and that's DTM. And look what happened to him.
Yeah, same as Pascal Wehrlein for that matter.
That's true.
In the end, it's just
touche.
Yes, it is just a reminder just how important circumstance is in life, in careers, in everything, really.
Yeah, and also it's like, I think people wrongly assume that, but it's not people assume it, it's just like when people are subconsciously thinking about these things, they imagine a driver, like you imagine Lewis Hamilton, you imagine him at his peak, and you imagine that he's always been at that level his entire career. You imagine like Paul di Resta, who beat Sebastian Vettel when they were teammates in 2006. You imagine in 2011 that they're both the exact same level of performance as they were 5 years previously. It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. Like, people change, people get older, people's skills develop, they get worse, they get motivated, they get demotivated. And I think if anything, Ricardo Zonta's example just shows, your junior stats can help you get to Formula 1, but they don't make you a good driver.
In Formula 1.
In Formula 1 specifically. Asterisk.
Yeah.
The next person I'm going to speak about could be debatable, but I'm going to go in the angle that they're an amazing driver. My lucky bastard today is in the opposite end of the spectrum, someone who had one race which completely, in their entire career, they earned 7 points in old money, and 6 of them were from one result. And the man I'm talking about is Nicola Larini. If those of you who are younger and don't know who Nicola Larini is, he was an Italian great who pushed his way through Italian junior formulae, who ended up getting many, many drives with backmarker teams like Coloni and Osella. He actually, I think, was a personal friend, of Enzo Coloni, and so kind of went through the ranks that way to get to Formula 1. Spent a couple of years at Ligier and Lamborghini, and from there basically scored absolutely 0 points. Lots of
Unfortunately, it was also in Ligier's backmarker phase. So
yes, I should have mentioned that. Yeah, because some people might mistakenly think that Ligier was a good team in 1990, but it was not. And as a result, Nicola Larini spent 4 full seasons in Formula 1 without a point. I think he would easily outrank Luca Badoer in this regard for the most pointless races. And then he got a break in 1992 when Ivan Capelli, who was put into Ferrari after Alain Prost's unceremonious departure from the team. Ivan Capelli disappointed heavily in the 1992 Ferrari. It wasn't a very good car, so to speak, but Jean Alesi made do with it. He didn't do great, but he made do. Ivan Capelli didn't. He didn't make do at all. It basically led to the collapse of his career, and he was gone by 1993. And Nicola Larini was the test driver for Ferrari. He sort of went most of his career, I think, around various Italian teams. And in 1992, he got the chance to jump into the Ferrari and didn't score any points. So you think, okay, that's it. That's the end of his Formula 1 career. But when he was 30, he got another chance in 1994 to drive for Ferrari. This time when Jean Alesi, if I'm not mistaken, got himself injured in the previous race. From there, Nicola Larini came into the 1994 Ferrari, which was a much stronger car. And he crashed into Ayrton Senna on the first lap, along with Mika Häkkinen. I think it was Matt Häkkinen's fault in retrospect, but it was just like a clump of cars on the first corner, and he was out at the first corner. And then his second race that year was at the fateful San Marino Grand Prix, which I'm sure needs no introduction for anyone who's watched the sport before. And in light of everything that happened that race, including the death of Roland Ratzenberger on Saturday and Ayrton Senna on Sunday, Nicola Larini scored his first points and his first podium in second place to Michael Schumacher, which was, his first points in, if I'm not mistaken, something like 70 races. And it was such a feel-good result for Larini in such possibly the most depressing, horrible weekend Formula One ever had. It's like you have this feel-good moment where Nicola Larini has just scored his first ever points, and he's on the podium. And that was his...
In Italy, mind you.
In Italy, at home, that's true.
Driving for Ferrari.
In his native San Marino. And he then didn't drive for another 3 years. He got a brief shot with Sauber. By then, he was in his mid-30s. Apparently, he didn't like Peter Sauber. I don't know what happened between them. But,
I think they had a personal beef over something. I don't recall what it was, but that animosity was pretty much shared between both of them. So,
I think...
that went down the hill very fast.
My knowledge of the story is that Peter Sauber put his lunch in the fridge and marked it Peter Sauber, and Nicola Larini ate it anyway. And I think for that reason, they parted ways. But Larini got one more point that year, and that's it. That was his whole career. So he spent about 75 races, of which 70 of which, roughly, were in backmarker teams not qualifying. And he just got a couple of late career races in one or two races at a time, and then scored a podium and won 6th place. So a very weird career in that sense.
Yeah, it's certainly one to write about. The thing is, as you say, he's a pretty damn good driver outside of Formula One, has multiple touring car championships, was very involved with the Alfa Romeo touring car efforts of the mid-90s, won races pretty much everywhere. So, as you said, a very talented driver who, again, the topic of this entire principle or the entire idea of the lucky bastard is, again, the concept of circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, he didn't have a great junior career in terms of results. He did well in the national junior formula, but it was because he knew Enzo Coloni, I think, was the reason why he actually got in the first place. And
good old vitamin B. So if anyone complains about only sons of former drivers getting drives nowadays, it wasn't better in the old days.
No, nepotism makes the world go round. But his late career is fascinating. It would be like, I don't know, it would be like one of the Ferrari drivers getting injured today and Nico Hülkenberg turning up and getting a 2nd place, and then in 3 years' time turning up again and driving 5 races for Aston Martin. That's the kind of the kind of career we're talking about here. Or maybe Giovinazzi. Maybe Giovinazzi is a better example. Imagine Giovinazzi just turning up for Ferrari, getting a 2nd place, and then in 3 years' time driving for Aston Martin for 5 races, and that's it. That's his whole career. It's surreal to think that but it's because he was also opportunities, as you said. He was the Ferrari test driver, if I'm not mistaken, for at least 2 or 3 years, and that meant that he had that opportunity when the Ferrari drivers inevitably left because they got fed up or they got injured in the case of Alesi.
Yeah, this also ties into the story of a reject, because Nicola Larini got his Ferrari substitute drive when the Ferrari was the clear 3rd best car on the grid in 1994, whereas another Ferrari test driver that got a famous substitute stint unfortunately had to deal with one of the first Ferraris produced in the current millennium, which is, of course, Luca Badoer. So,
dear.
Again, it all, in a way, ties together.
Yeah, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Damn, think about Luca Badoer. So that was just to tease you.
had Barro's forced comeback come a year earlier in the 2008 Ferrari, could have scored some point. Of course, we will never know. It's in the end very hypothetical, but it all comes down to being given the chance to be in the right moment at the right time, and then having things go right for you.
Yeah, imagine Badoer in any of the previous or following 5 years of Formula One jumping into the Ferrari. What a sad case for Badoer. Yeah.
Yeah. So, given that we are talking about substitute drivers, we talked about Zonta's engine failure at Spa 2004. He was also not the regular driver for that team that year. He only got into the car later in the year once Cristiano da Matta had enough of Formula One, or Toyota had enough of him. I don't recall which side broke it off.
Yeah, I mean, the people like Hulkenberg, however much we take the piss in the fact that why does everyone hire Hulkenberg as the substitute driver every time someone gets ill? But it's opportunities like that which make or break careers for some people. And we've just seen that. I think this brings this full circle. Nick De Vries has just jumped in as a substitute at the Italian Grand Prix and scored a fantastic 9th place. So I think that's a good way to bring this back to how we started.
Indeed. We will have to find out whether this was his moment in the sun, whether he can build on it, and if he can build on it, whether he proves to have the talent to make it or not, or whether he's going to get his profile in the end with us after all. We are watching.
Yeah, he make a damn good profile though. That is unless he comes back next weekend and gets a 2nd place for Williams, which has been done before last year. So all Nick De Vries needs is to qualify 2nd, and then have Singapore have a typhoon and a red flag and 2 racing laps, and then Bob's your uncle.
And given that Singapore has generally been extremely lucky with its Formula One Grand Prix, given the actual standard climate there, I think we are overdue for one. So yeah, look forward to the 2022 Singapore Emergency Podcast.
We're tempting fate. It's not going to be the most boring race in human history. Not a single recorded overtake. A whole 20 finishers, and they finish in Noah's Ark order. So, any closing words, Lennart?
Well, I have 2 closing words. One is, always appreciate your circumstances in life when they are good, because we all know it can turn bad, and we all know those chances when you get them don't come along too often. And the second thing is, where teammates are close, teammates collide.
You know, that was like 50 words. I asked you for 2 words. You said 2 words, and you gave me 50. That's staying in. Done. Perfect.